Okay, well, 7 o'clock. Is Stacy gonna be here online or not at all?
She's not here at all today.
Okay. Well, I call the meeting to order. Hi, Mark.
Okay.
Is there a short reflection from anyone? Mark, usually the most sort of reflective person we have.
I don't have one tonight.
Okay,
Can you give me a little background on that? It's kind of a vestige that's been with us for a while.
I think Tim Hahn was the one who
Tim
used
was
to
big
always
on it.
do it, whether it was originated with him or not, if somebody who was on the board years ago. He would have some little reading or something out of the news or something about trees. And
think
it's
it's a
been a
nice idea.
sporadic thing since.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to keep there. I think it's a good idea to keep there.
well, if somebody wants something.
Yeah, so if you, Richard, if you think of something,
Yeah.
So observation or
Can be a
thought,
quote.
Yeah.
anything about
Yeah.
trees.
A time with a quote from John Neal, something like that.
I will make one brief, not reflection actually, but I think everybody probably saw the story in the Times about Seattle Tree Action is upset because a whole bunch of trees are marked as protected in Seattle that aren't being protected from anything. I didn't misunderstand it, to be honest.
I did see that article.
You-
Aren't they supposed to protect us?
No, and we pretty much have, a tree is like. The characteristic of the tree will tell whether how much protection it's got. It's not like it's, but they have currently maps of protected trees, some of which are gone, some of which are. Most of which are in no danger of being.
right, or in parks or something where there's not
Yeah, or they're,
any
yeah,
risk, they're not like things that would be on private property at risk of development, being cut for development or anything like that.
yeah, I mean, that, if it said there was things at risk of development that they had. Formally protected, the way we kind of do for some of our trees. That would have made sense, but it didn't seem to be the case, it's. And it's like, I feel better about our way of dealing with trees. A little bit, I always felt pretty good about it anyway, but even better after reading that. Yeah. All right, introduction, I think we are all. Everybody who's here knows everybody who's here.
Yep.
The agenda, any comments on the agenda?
Well, I have two little points that I'd like to raise. I think they come up in our discussion of work plan. They're just, they're kind of implementing ideas for a couple of the points on there. Which I think we could just discuss quickly in the course of having that conversation. Unless you prefer to pull them out separately.
I think if they're part of the work plan, let's do it when we discuss the work plan.
Yeah, one of this is a remake of the Ivy Out video that we talked about, and the other one, well, the other one is to do an invitation from Windermere to give a talk on trees to with their staff. That I think cuts within our work plan, and we might just decide to do it.
I think Larry has doing his special meetings. You can't really change the.
Yeah.
Well, Larry's not here, that's in here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
yes, for that special meeting, you can't change.
So we can talk about it in the course of our discussion.
Yeah.
Other than that, I would approve the agenda. I'll move to approve it.
My second,
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, minutes, it's December 2024 meeting. I'm having all of our minutes online, but really helpful, but starting to put things together that we might want to talk about in the annual report, go through the minutes and see what we talked about in the minutes. Covered most of it.
well, I don't see anything,
Any other comments on the minutes?
Is that a movement?
yeah, so unless anybody else does, I move we accept the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, public comments. Nobody waiting to comment. So we're halfway through the agenda.
Look at us go.
Reports and announcements. I guess I have one sort of announcement that's may inform some of the other things we're doing tonight. I am scheduled for cardiac surgery on February 11th. And for about a week and a half before that, I'm going to be sort of self quarantining so I don't catch anything. You know, say, oh, you've got a cold, you can't have your surgery. And they say the recovery is pretty slow, so it'll probably be at the very least the middle of March. more likely April before I want to do anything that is involved with the work we do here. So that may end up informing some of the things that we do today, or may not. I've talked to Drew about it a little bit and how it fits in with scheduling with the council, and things like that.
Yeah, it's not,
Well, we have a vice chair who can stand
We
in
do.
the event that you're unable.
yeah, I've been a little bit unclear as to exactly when the term ended.
Right.
I thought it was through February.
I think it is end of February is when officially, right, the transition.
No, and I'm gonna ask Mark to chair the next meeting, because I should be able to attend it from home. But I will be into the point then when I really don't want to be in meeting rooms with people who might have goals.
Yeah, right, well, that's fine. So I hope it goes well for you.
For what? Thank
We'll
you.
all be hoping. I have an announcement, and just that I already told Doug and Elizabeth this, but I had mistakenly thought that my term would end in February this year, but when I was getting things together to send to Doug about the annual report, I realized I saw that my term doesn't end until a year from February, so I will be around for another year.
And I think I'm probably a year behind you, and I don't really know. I saw your email and said, oh, I should check mine, but I never did.
Well, on that last year's annual report I sent you, it lists all
Oh,
the members and what their dates of service are and when their expiration comes. And so that's one thing you should update and then prepare that to send to the council is,
and I will say Brian started about 2 months ago.
yeah, I think we just put a year down for starting that, so. And although there is something, and Elizabeth, maybe you can help with this. People who start in a position that already has an end date, right? So that the fact that somebody started this year doesn't necessarily mean that their term ends in 3 years. It may mean that it ends next year or something, because the term has an end date, not the person's, doesn't start when the person's appointed. So Elizabeth, maybe you could check on that and see,
Yeah, because
you know, for Richard's
Because
new
it-
appointment. and-
Yeah,
and Victoria and Stacy too.
Yeah, but I think we got them last year. Set, they were on last year.
We were on last year, I think our first meeting was either December or January a year ago. But I do remember that at least one of us wasn't the full
Right, you had
term
different-
because we picked up somebody
dates,
else's
right.
term who had
So
left.
that should be on that.
Yeah.
Should be on that.
Last year's annual report.
Right. Okay, I am certainly planning to basically use this last year's report as the
A template, just.
template for this.
Yeah, that's how I've been doing it.
Of course, there's not very many things that we planned to do last year that we have to put on the report for this year, because we did most of them. Kind of satisfactory.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, every year I worry a little bit that it looks like it might be a thin annual report, but you know, when you start putting things down on paper, it fills up. Yeah,
We do-
it's
we do
the
have
slackers, I
that
think we.
Okay, the 2025 report, any other reports or announcements?
Corey wanted me to pass along that the Green Fair is gonna be March 29th this year, a little earlier than April. So just to start thinking about that, if we want to do something for Green Fair. That put the date in.
Yes, we definitely should. I think that's a good public outreach event.
Get that in minutes and if you can decide in March who's gonna do it, you know, have to decide in March who's gonna do it.
Yeah.
Talk about it next meeting. Yeah. Let's do it. Okay, the work plan. As I kind of said in the email, I think I sent to everybody.
Before we move on, sorry, I got distracted looking at the term dates. I do have one more announcement or report, whatever you'd like to call it.
What is it?
The CPAT update. We had a meeting last night. So Climate Policy Advisory Team met last night. The consultants that are working with that team have been progressing through. Most of last night's update was on the policy analysis. So they went through current city policies to identify what already exists around climate, identify any gaps. And that's what's going to guide some of when we look at recommendations for drafts. We'll be looking at filling those gaps. all of the details of that. They had their draft that was sent out to us last night of their full like 25-page report. As soon as that's finalized, it'll be going up. There is now a page on the city website with all of the CPAT information. So if you want to look through any of it or get more details about any of the draft things they're drafting, it will all be posted in the resource library there. The other piece was they are making progress on the greenhouse gas emissions analysis, which they presented last night. And a lot of it is stuff that is hard for us to make a significant local impact on, things like SeaTac air travel. That is both hard for us to measure at this hyper local level and hard for us to have a significant impact on. But there are a few pieces in greenhouse gas that are locally measured, and there is potentially an opportunity in the new climate element to move the needle on. So that's what the presentation was. If folks have questions about it, I'm happy to answer them.
So when they talk about climate, is that kind of what we as individuals experience in Lake Forest Park? Because that means if that's true, then things like putting trees in parking lots, and just generally trying to increase the tree canopy,
Yeah.
all climate elements that actually do affect us directly. If we have more
Yes.
greenery in Lake Forest Park, Lake
Yes.
Forest Park citizens experience a better climate.
Absolutely. So they've gone
Unlike
through-
putting CO2 in the air, which we really don't.
Yeah, so on the policy analysis, they went through and looked at what is the like climate related impact of different specific policies, and a number of them are around trees that have benefits in multiple types of benefits around climate and climate resilience, climate change resiliency in Lake Forest Park. So that is definitely part of it. And there are a number of them that they went through and they identified like, this could also be interpreted to have multiple other climate related benefits, but it's explicitly written to relate to this one benefit. So, yeah. Anything I missed from that meeting, Mark?
No, excellent. I just add they had a couple comments that applied to last year. When they did the gap analysis, they found plenty of tree policy. And then lots of thanks and appreciation for the work that was done last year to prepare in the periodic update of the comprehensive plan, which is now adopted.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. And thank you for your input. It's hard to believe that was last February, March, and April. And here we are again. Yeah.
One other thing, by way of announcement, I was at I'm on the Arboretum Curation Committee, which met yesterday, and the person from the city parks department who's on that committee mentioned that he had seen a list of
City of Seattle.
City of Seattle, of climate resilient trees for the Pacific Northwest. Something that he thinks was developed out of Vancouver or someplace in BC. But he was going to, I said, I would like to see that. And I thought that's something that we could have, or Lake Forest Park might be able to use to inform, things like tree decisions. And so he said he would forward it to both the Arboretum Committee and me as part of that. Well, I haven't seen it yet, but I'll pass it around when I get it.
Maybe
That'd be great. We need that.
maybe at some point in the future, we could add another page to the tree list, saying, trees that have been called out.
Yeah.
As we've got a,
Or add a column to the list to saying something about climate resilience that
A marker designation throughout.
one,
that
2, or 3 or
indicates-
something, however, we'll see how they deal with it.
we could go back and revisit that now and just add that column on it. Kind of like the tree list off the way, frankly.
Yeah.
Get it approved.
It'd just be another little like small little indicator thing or something. We could just, yeah, let's see what it looks like and then see if there's an easy way to just indicate it on ours or not.
Even if it's just something we could have on the city website as a full
Other
point of information
resource.
for
Yeah,
residents.
yeah. Like, here's the tree list, blah, blah, and then, climate resiliency, click through here to see it.
Climate resilient trees. There's a lot of those trees are probably quite climate resistant, climate resilient. But they're not gonna be in the list. A lot of the trees on our tree list, which
Yeah.
are gonna be perfectly reasonable climate
Yeah,
resistant.
and I have no idea how big this list is or how much overlap it will be with harvest or anything else.
Okay, great, yeah, let's look into that and see what we can do with it.
I don't really have a report from the city council. It's been pretty light so far. I apologize for being late. I was actually upstairs. There's the information session for the upcoming fire district election. That's happening next month. Not allowed to state an opinion. I'll just point out that the city, I think it's a matter of public record that the city council last month endorsed the regional fire district vote. But there's a lot of helpful information. I think it's recorded, if you're curious about that. Well, I actually probably say, this would be a formal merger between North Shore, which is us and Kenmore, with Shoreline Fire. So the vote next month would be, do we want to officially merge into a single regional fire agency? Or do we want to stay as two separate agencies?
Didn't we have a vote on this like a year ago? Year and a half ago, maybe?
There was a vote about similar vote. Did we want to merge with Woodinville?
Oh, that's right.
And that was a resounding no.
Right.
That was back in 2020.
We would be right between Kenmore and Shoreline, so it could be an advantage for us.
Yeah, no,
It's a shoreline.
this makes sense. Woodinville, they just, we had these guys from Woodinville coming to fight our fire, and does that really make any sense? And I was aware of it because the firemen are always out. The trail crossing out here. In front of the town center.
So that was really
This
just more
makes-
for informational.
Yeah, this makes,
purposes.
that one makes a
But
lot more
I
sense.
will take any other time from this meeting.
All right, thank you. All right, the work plan. Are we ready to move on to the work plan? I think we are. I may have said this either in the email I sent out or probably not last meeting, but I have always disliked what they go, strategic planning, because the way we did it in my department was a complete waste of time. It didn't accomplish anything. So this looks so much like strategic planning that I kind of got through it as fast as I could last week or last month. But as I began to look at it and think about it, I realized that it really doesn't hurt us at all to think a little bit about what our most important objectives are, which is why I put it back in the, and I know I said some of this in the email. So I wanted to at least revisit it briefly and see if there's anything we want to add, or possibly more important, if there's anything we want to highlight and say, yeah, this is the highest priority for this year. I don't know if we need to do that. If we want to call out certain things as most important, but if we do it.
I like the idea of having priorities, so there's a lot of stuff in the list, so knowing what to focus on first. Or most.
And then I have a little short thing, we can pull it up, related to work planning about a grant that we were awarded. That you would use to go to city council to get accepted. But would fit in with the 2025 work plan item of looking at the community forest management plan. So I can explain, what that money is, if, we're able to accept it. So right now, like I applied for it. For almost the full amount, 75,000, about that, and got approved. So now it's just kind of like a matter of if the city and, everybody on board wants to accept the money. But I thought we could take this to city council when we take the work plan stuff to it, as kind of a nice tie-in. And reason if it's something you guys are interested in. So this is just a really short little thing. Next one. So this grant's through Sustainable Forestry Institute, or SFI. And I can throw this up if you guys want to take a look at this after. Basically they have an urban and community forestry sustainability standard, which is a comprehensive framework aimed at promoting sustainable forest management in urban areas. The standard helps ensure that environmental, social, economic factors are balanced to maintain long-term health and resilience of urban forests. So it's kind of broken down into all of these objectives. And basically what this grant pays for is like a consultant, or if you had someone in-house that wanted to do it, come in and evaluate how you're doing. So these are expanded into more, categories based on each one, how you're doing with each of these. And so it's kind of letting you gauge, where the weak spots in your urban forestry program might be. So that can inform updating our community management plan from there. So if we go to the next slide. So yeah, you see too, some of them are like protection of this, I'm working with Indigenous participation, communication, science, like all that. So it's a measure of how sustainable and comprehensive it currently is, and then also provides money to help with the consultant relationship of providing solutions and pathways and suggestions to improving those categories as well. So part of this, getting the higher amount though is also, they have a certification, like an SFI, Sustainable Forest, Urban Forest Certification. So we would kind of be doing an audit to see if, based on what we all have going on, you know, in their evaluation, like, would we qualify for that certification? So by taking this money, we're not saying that we're definitely gonna certify, but we're saying we will audit and evaluate if we qualify for the certification. But, you know, at the end of all of this, in a year or something, then we could decide based on just, you know, how much money it would be or what the benefits would be, if it would be something we'd want to go for. So we're not saying we have to do their certification by taking their money, but we just have to evaluate if we would apply. And so that's part of benchmarking yourself against the sustainability standard in these categories with it. Yeah, so it's a good chunk of money, and I think it would really give us a good basis and some potential pathways and advice from whoever we hire to get to do it as well, of ways we could update our community forest plan to include more of these things.
Would it actually, would that grant also help, actual producing a document, plan document, incorporating that stuff? And,
I will have to check with SFI about what the limits are, like if we write it really broadly, there's a lot of things we can do. And I believe from talking with them that we probably could. Get them to, do that as part of the evaluation, or at least provide a really strong framework that we could just plug in, kind of, even if they're not fully writing it.
Actually, my question was the same.
Same thing, yeah. So it's very much like they're saying, we wanna set you up for success in meeting all of these. And so the money, that big chunk of money is to help you get there. And so if we get to one of these and it's like having a strong community forest plan, and we're like, wow, ours is really outdated. You know, updating that can be a part of the getting ready for certification process. So it originally was a $25,000 grant I applied for to just do this part, measuring up there, and they said you want 75,000 as like a pre certification, audit included. And I was like, well, how much does that pre-certification audit really cost? $15,000? And they're like, no, it doesn't cost a lot of money at all. So then there's just a lot of extra money in there to kind of aid in getting you ready for certification through a bunch of different things.
So I guess the ongoing, but commitment would be if you do go through this, you get certified, then city has to sign up for maintaining certification.
Yeah, if we want to, but it is not a requirement that we certify to take this money. So I think like they're hoping people will and see the benefit in it, but we do not have to do it at all by taking this. It's not part of the contract or, objectives or outcomes for accepting the grant.
What do you think is the timeline, Drew, for moving on this?
1 year.
In
So.
in terms of accepting the money?
Oh, accepting the money. So we have to go to city council to, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, recap the 2024 work plan and then present the 2025 one for tree board. Is that correct? You're muted.
You're still muted.
Thank you. We're aiming towards May, mostly because other items are anticipated, and this is not in the budget. And it doesn't expire. And so there'll be opportunities for the council and commissions and community to talk about updating plans and what that means. And it's been discussed last year. This is one of those plans that could use it, and it's not currently funded. So it's a long conversation about what it is, how to fund it, what it gets us, and then possibly getting to go ahead to look at a application or contract. So it's not something anticipated to start right now, but we're kind of anticipating spring. And so this is like a first touch.
So yeah, first touch would be mentioning it and introducing it as part of our work plan, which is why I'm bringing it up now during this category of saying, okay, for 2025, we're doing what we can to prepare to update and start updating that plan. And part of that's taking this money to evaluate where we currently stand so that we know what needs to be included in an update, was kind of what I was thinking. And so if we bring it as a first touch to council with the work plan there, it shows its relevance to what we're doing, and everything like that. And then we'll probably have to come back to council again and 2 or 3 times, I'm assuming, to get this where it needs to be.
But probably, we could probably just leave the work plan the way it is, but whoever presents it to council, which is probably gonna be Mark. could say, one of the big elements of this is this grant.
Yeah, and I'm down to come to and
Yeah.
build this out a little better and talk about it,
Sure,
in there
yeah.
and the benefits it would have.
But if,
So-
yeah, I mean, we don't,
And I can get a few more follow-up questions from Mike Martini with SFI too about, like have a list if we could use it for these kind of things, it'd be good.
So you said there was a 1-year timeline. Is that once we accept it, then the clock will start ticking, we have a year to use it, or?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
Great.
so they were hoping, because it's always how their grants, like, they gave it to us, said we got accepted. Near the end of December, and then they're like, okay, 3 weeks, get this, and we're like, that's not kind of how it's supposed
That's
to
cute.
be. So we gotta bring this to council, get everybody on board, talk to finance and everything, and so they were like, that's fine, as long as you have a plan, we can defer it, and then once you sign, you have a year.
Okay, great.
So,
A year to use the funds.
yes, yeah, it's quarterly reporting minimum, so just for appropriates, and then it's kind of, tracks things, so I meet with them every 3 months, probably with the tree board, whoever's the president, and just kind of provide progress reports from there. Great.
Do you have a sense whether they're consultants who are knowledgeable about this, who would be? work with,
It's tough, it's newer,
or-
but a lot of people are applying for it right now. So I think there's probably gonna be a niche of doing it, but I think it's gonna require a really strong scope of work that we write. It's not one where we can say we need this SFI thing, it's kind of out there and everybody's doing it, they know what it is. So I think it is gonna have a really defined scope of work for the request for service, on it. Of saying like, we want you to do these in this way, potentially including this. So I think we're gonna have to be a little picky about it that way. I was kind of hoping, because I'm part-time, that I was gonna be able to finagle my way into extra hours weekly to do this myself for the week and then supplement out some consulting from there. But the reporting requirements go up because every time we need funds to pay me out, like it would have to go through, so for us, city this size, it just didn't make sense to do it that way. So we're gonna go full consult. Which I'm totally fine. But so that's kind of the rough plan. Again, just depends, gotta get a lot of people on board still. But when it was, and just so you guys know for future, like grant applications, we do everything, when it was 25,000, that also was deemed an amount that might not be worth it for the city, just based on the obligations from finance to do the quarterly reporting, and that council would probably wanna see it still and all of that. So once we got it up to 75,000, that was like, okay, this is seeming more realistic, maybe now, and beneficial.
And Drew, do you need any sort of like backing or informal from the tree board or? at this
Yeah.
point?
So I think the work plan saying like, this is an integral part of our work plan is like huge, coming from you guys, shows that. And shows the relevance to the tree board and that you guys are there, and then just the verbal, agreement that you're gonna help out with, if we get this and it's secured, writing that. Scope of work for the request for service, and then doing the quarterly check-ins with them.
Yeah.
So I think.
So do you think this should be a line item in the work plan that we add
I
to
think
this?
what I prefer to do is, I said we could think about highlighting the most important things I want to do this year. I was planning to suggest this anyway, review the community forest management plan is one of the, one or two or three items we pull out as the most important things. And then consider this part of it, but the fact that I'm thinking of bold basing it basically, in the.
Yeah, no, that's.
And then when, I guess when Mark presented it, he can say, here's a couple of things we have special interest in.
Yeah.
And feed into that.
But so we would list the grant specifically in the plan?
Or would we have to be that specific? While we're talking about this item, why don't we look at it? It's the last one on the second page, right? And maybe that could be modified to say, would it just to review and update?
Yeah, like comprehensive review and update, or something like that.
Would that, you think that'd be enough for purposes going forward at this point?
I think so.
Modify it like that.
And then when we just bring it to council the first time, we can say, these are the top priority things. And as part of the comprehensive review, and update of this. We
We're
think this
hoping
grant,
that
we're,
this-
yeah,
We have this money to do that item.
yeah, free money.
Yeah.
No,
So-
but the part of the information is how far along in a review this grant could get us. And so that is yet to be determined. There may be an element of a budget adjustment or a request or ask for what's needed to do a full review. So that hasn't been determined. That's why we need more time.
personally, I think it's a great opportunity, just on what you told us, and to use it as a framework to update our community forest management plan, it seems like just a great alignment.
Right, yeah, you guys are already talking about doing it, so when I saw it, I was like. All right, great.
It's an item in the comprehensive plan that was just adopted. We're going to add an implementation chapter with this next coming amendment. And that is an implementation measure, so it's nice to be talking about it already.
Wow.
Cool, yeah, and I actually found out about that grant from going to the UW Center for Horticulture's like urban forestry symposium that they had. And yeah, the SFI was there talking about the grant. And so, yeah, just like a good resource there.
Well done. Good.
Yes. It is really too bad we can't use it to make you full time, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
We're doing what we can. 30 hours.
Okay, so I guess getting back to the plan, my thought would be the other sort of major thing that's kind of new and will take time is the 5 Acre Woods. It's on here somewhere.
Top of the second page or third item. on
No,
the second
okay,
page.
tree planting and maintenance events. That was the other item I looked at when I saw it. They said maybe we should call that out as one of our high priorities. The other stuff we do all the time, most of the other stuff like could probably look
Little
at it in
things
detail.
like the Arbor Day and the
Yeah, I mean, that's
you know,
not really a high
green fair and
priority.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
We do them, but they aren't like priority type items.
And I think that one of the things that we don't do. Reviewing the web content is it's ongoing. I don't know if it's. If we could make that a special high priority for this year, but it probably wouldn't be my first choice as an item, but. You know, if we think the web content is difficult enough to deal with, if we want to highlight that, you're shaking your head, Victoria.
It seems like one of those kind of background things that if something comes up related to it, we can assess, but I wouldn't put it as a priority personally.
Okay.
That seems important just from a public, education and information standpoint. But I agree, it's probably not a big project.
Yeah, it probably isn't one of the main emphases for the whole tree board for the whole year.
Well, no, but I do think it is something that somebody should be looking at.
Yeah.
And deciding what are the crucial things that would improve our website presence.
Oh, I agree.
I think someone should be doing that, and it may not be an urgent kind of thing to carry out, but I think sometime during the year. We ought to be thinking of, if there are any major things that could be done, that would help us in public outreach and
Probably the first thing that a lot of people see if they're looking for trees or tree board
Right.
information.
But I do think it's should be handled kind of like that, something that we want to look at and try to see major changes that we could make without revamping the whole everything, that I think kind of bogged us down when we looked at that before.
Can we use some of the grant money to something? I'm kidding.
I would personally highlight like the reviewing community forest management and assessing the results of the tree inventory to make recommendations on exceptional tree sizes. And that like once we have some of those pieces, if we're updating things, that seems like a natural point to then go look at where is that on the website? Do we want to highlight it differently? Have it linked differently? And do some of those incremental
What point is
changes.
that again?
Second
Second
under
also
advised
tree
mayor
inventory.
is the exceptional tree sizes work.
Yeah, that's something that's coming to a head that we want to complete this year.
Yeah,
so-
like
so-
that I would put right at the top of my list
Yeah.
of like things we are close to the finish line on and should finish.
Yeah. And I think the pursuing the invasive tree removal thing in 5 Acre Woods. It's the first sort of big initiative we've taken on, I think, really since the McAlure Creek invasive plant removal. And so I think it would be good to highlight that. It might, from simply a balance perspective, it might be good to list a priority item in each of the 3 distinct areas in our work plan, so
Like there's two things in the bottom one, but
that's fine. I think they have more than one in each, that would.
What do you think they are done in the lab?
oh, I think we talked about assessing the results of the tree inventory and making recommendations to the council. We should finish that fairly early, but it's still pretty important.
Yeah.
And then review and update the community forest management plan. Those are,
Do we know when that assessment is gonna happen?
that's something we'll talk about tonight.
It's not gonna happen. It's gonna happen this year, makes sense.
Oh, I sure hope we will.
Yeah,
So in the public outreach and education section, maybe the reviewing the web content would be the thing to prioritize there.
Yeah. I think it's important, 'cause it really is hard to find stuff on the website.
Yeah.
For me. And I probably use it more than almost anybody in Lake Forest Park, well, except for people who work here. But, and the fact that in order to find out about tree planting, you have to go through permits. The first page, you have to start with permits and work yourself from there. Trees. It doesn't seem like the most transparent way to go.
I noticed, Richard, you don't want to highlight the updating the tree walks?
I did, as you know, I've been procrastinating on getting that last two done, but I will get at least one done this spring. No, if it's something we want to highlight as a priority for the tree board, but
Probably not, but it's gonna.
you're just poking me a little bit.
It's a great point of outreach for it.
Yeah.
He said you can't go on a tree walk if you're dragging your feet.
Do you know the background on this? You know the little booklet on tree walks? that-
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so 2 years ago, I started revising them and having color photos and making it in a downloadable PDF that you can see, take with you when you go on the walk. And then and the booklet just describes, you know, by street address, what the tree is that you're supposed to see. And most people don't know trees very well. And they might look around and say, oh, I wonder what tree they mean. And so they can look here and see a picture. There's the tree on that site. And I think it's makes those tree walks more 21st century and more useful.
Yeah, that sounds like a great.
So I did, what great ones got the first two done? There's 4 in that booklet and I haven't got the last 2 done. I got photos for one of them all ready to go. I just haven't. And then updating too. I mean, what I found is that occasionally some of those trees are no longer there. Our ones that were described as, you know, 15 feet tall are now 50 feet tall, things like that. We've been trying to get that. I started working with David Hepp on that, really, the original. Tree park.
Is there more things to propose? Changes we're gonna make to what's here, or we're gonna highlight? Review web content. Pursue invasive species tree removal of 5 acre woods, maybe it's 3 acres.
So, you know, there's the,
Well, it is growing.
Assess the results of the tree inventory study and review and update the community forest management plan. So that's actually editing the words. And
Actually, what was it, comprehensive?
Yeah, and like comprehensive review and update, or something just showing that we're going really in depth with it. That's how the,
okay, comprehensive review and update of community forest management, plan. Comprehensively review, no.
Do you want that to have like to best align with current best practices or something like that? That indicates like, we're not just reviewing to see like, is it still good, but we're looking at, it's been a long time, is it in alignment with current trends and recommendations?
yeah, I mean, that's what you guys, if you want to come up with some language, we also could say like to meet the SFI urban and community forestry standard, you know, because that would make it really relevant to what.
right, I think connecting it to the grant
Yeah,
like that makes sense.
I think it would be helpful just to have some kind of statement in there of why are we reviewing it?
I'm not sure why we're reviewing it. I mean, once we start reviewing it, then we'll figure out what things really need to be changed.
Presumably, we're reviewing it because we feel like it is out of date with
Yeah, it
Well,
needs to be
current
updated. I think that's a good one.
recommendations.
Review and update, comprehensive review and update covers that, but putting in specific things that we think are gonna pose a problem.
I'm a little
I would
hesitant to make
prefer
it
to-
too specific myself.
I would prefer to wait till
Yeah.
we see what we think is actually wrong with it before we say we're gonna update it.
That's good. Or we may not want to take that certification.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Go on.
So
Okay, so suddenly if I'm gonna be presenting this, I got, the prioritized items were number 2 on the first page, develop content.
one on the first.
No, number 1, reviewing the web content.
Oh, that's great, okay. And not the second one, develop content to improve public outreach. At this point, it will be stuff we need along the way, but figure that.
We did do some of that in the last year, which should be
Yeah,
on the,
Developing content will be as needed.
yeah.
For
Some of that
example-
will be in the
Report, yeah.
annual report.
Tree walks will be an example of that.
Yes.
When that happens next year. Is there anything else on that first page then, besides that, number one item?
Just that one, I think.
Okay. And what did I get? I got the only item under planting and maintenance.
5 acre
Support
woods.
remote. Could we scratch the last part of that? I don't know what and or rain garden culverts means.
That's not the one we're highlighting. It's the next one, the 5
Oh,
acre woods and tree removal, basic tree removal. Is a priority.
Show me where that is. I'm not seeing it.
Are you on the copy that's in our agenda
Oh, yeah.
packet?
Yeah, we had that, I'm looking at the copy.
Oh,
You
yeah,
got an updated version of that?
Yes.
Put it in the agenda.
the last page of the,
It's this one here, is the one we're talking about.
Gotcha. Okay.
And again, I'm gonna suggest that maybe Elizabeth reproduces in boldface those 4 items.
Yeah.
And then change the wording on the last one to make it put comprehensive and update in there. Not just look at it and say, yes, fine. So that's not what we're gonna do.
Were there any other items then that I missed under the advised mayor and council category?
Well,
second
accessories
was
also
the last one.
inventory. It's the second one, the first one I've got. Okay, and review and update for management plan,
you'll have a copy from Elizabeth, they'll have those in bold print,
right?
so that will.
Yeah, well,
Potentially move them to the top of each of their sections as well.
Do
Does
that,
that make sense?
yeah, I like that.
in fact, my thought then, we want to do more than just look at priorities. I have a couple of editing suggestions.
Yeah, I have a couple comments
Okay.
too.
I
Once
think
we
it'd
get
be
to it.
worth doing it because I'm hoping that this is gonna be it tonight.
When I delivered this to the council the last couple of years. I basically spent most of my time talking about the highlighted topics,
Couple
not
items.
going into details on all the rest of it, because I don't think they
Yeah.
need that much detail and
Right.
know
That's
about
the
that
whole
much
thing in
time
front of them.
spent on
That's
it.
right. That's right. Well, I did have a couple of thoughts we could do. I mentioned a minute ago under that item. Support and promote tree planting, maintenance, blah, blah, blah. For example, street tree program and tree planting in parks. I just don't know what and or rain garden culverts means. In the context of promoting tree planting. So I would just, seem to be clear to me if we just stopped at tree planting in parks, period.
Yeah, I
It
think
shouldn't
that's-
it should not an or with planting in parks.
I would leave it only because I think it's talking about like stormwater infrastructure. Which trees are like a big part of, and there's just a lot of overlap right now. Like Seattle SBU is doing a lot of like stormwater infrastructure where you're matching trees as you update like those stormwater facilities. And I know with some of the like staff transitions and rearranging in the city, I think we are gonna get an engineer that is a little more stormwater focused in the future, or someone who maybe would be doing a little bit more of that.
Well, let's just say that then
So
instead
it's
of
just kind
the,
of nice to leave in there, if there's potentially more
Well, maybe
avenues.
if
Let's
we
say
drop the
stormwater
word culvert
infrastructure.
off of
Yeah.
that. We dropped the word culvert, because I just don't know what a rain garden culvert is.
let's drop rain garden cover and say stormwater infrastructure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds more.
So yeah, again, it's like the staff, yeah, public works shakes out, we might just have a little more rainwater related stuff going on that could.
And just incidentally, when I looked last year or the year before, whenever I went around and looked at all the possible places we might plant trees. Quite a few of them were parts of the stormwater infrastructure. They were.
And in certain parts of
drainage
Lake
ditches,
Forest
things like
Park,
that.
there are these open stormwater runoff ditches right in the street right of way at the edge of, in front of people's yards. In places that would be nice to be able to plant trees, but I just don't think there's something about those that makes them required, although I don't think they ever carry runoff. You know, they have to go surface runoff in them.
Yeah.
But it denies the possibility of planting trees along the right of way in those areas, which is too bad.
Well, things I'm talking about more are sort of stormwater recharge
Right,
areas, basins,
yeah,
and there's usually an area around the basin. That would be a potential place we could plant trees. And again, if we're gonna be looking for places to plant trees that we get from Sound Transit. Those things might be able to curtain them all with not Lombardy poplar, but
You know,
something.
that's another point I'd like to. Back on page one, the third item, host annual Arbor Day activities, replanting. I think we should, my feeling is we ought to strike that, keeping in mind possible sound transit replanting opportunities.
Yeah, I think you're right, because that's something we've sort of tabled until it comes back up again.
Yeah, and if it comes up, we'll grab it. So I don't think we need to call it out as like what we're holding out for.
Arbor Day is an activity we do every year anyways, and that's a line item by itself.
Couldn't scratch that last half of it.
And I understand, no, it just doesn't need to go into that point, but I do understand that the Climate Action Committee is still a group would like to work with us on that Arbor Day activity.
Mhm.
And if that turns out to be the same as the 5 Acre Woods project, which I'm not sure it is, but maybe. If it is, then that's kind of a workforce that we're starting to get together there.
I think the meeting I had in 5 Acre Wood with some people from the Lake Forest Park Stewardship Foundation happened, and somebody from the tree board, or I mean, the Parks Board was there also.
Yeah.
Happened after our last meeting, so maybe
They should be involved.
now is the time I could mention that. Everybody was very enthusiastic about it, but someone from the Stewardship Foundation mentioned that there is a plan, and I think I sent a link around in the email to you guys. That had some development plan for that corner of the park, right, Acre Woods. Parking lot or something. I think with the fact that they are now getting that additional 2 acres. That has a house and a driveway and some other stuff. Whatever plans they may have, which were just, I think. A plan that they had to come up with.
It was pretty preliminary.
It was very preliminary, and I think we should push ahead. And if we meet some resistance on the part of the city, maybe try to convince them that this should be done. Removing invasives and planting natives in one of our featured new parks. Is something we should do.
I can't imagine I don't know any pushback from the city on that. Really,
I don't know how wedded city, staff come to plans that have been drawn up at some point in the past.
But I'm assuming this work would be done in coordination with the city.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the parks. And so it was nice that someone from the park board, I've forgotten his name now, but he is chair of the park board, was there.
Yeah.
And so,
Do you
and
think,
it would require some funding, and the foundation said that they could probably provide some funding, but I thought we could probably come up with some also. Because we're gonna have to hire tree people to come in and remove some of those big locusts and things. It's not something we could just do with volunteer labor.
So either that is our Arbor Day activity for the year, or it's not.
I don't think it can be an Arbor Day activity. It's too big and it's gonna take too long to plan.
So we need to give some thinking then about what our Arbor Day activity would be, and I don't know.
Well, one thing we talked about was doing guided tree walks.
Yes, we did, like the parks.
Yeah,
The parks.
or on the tree walks that we have the brochures for, or park tree walks, but I think,
Maybe we could use that as an opportunity if you needed help to update the.
yeah. Well, we got 2 ready to go, and I can get the 3rd one done before then, and that would give us some options for tree walks.
If you want any help, I'd be happy.
That'd be great to do, whenever you bring your cell phone and you can follow along as Richard points out other things, highlights things along the way, whatever.
And this year, Arbor Day and Earth Day are the same week, which is part of why we were talking about doing something with the.
Do we not have dates? Do you know what the dates are about?
I can't remember. It's been a couple months since I looked it up. But that's where the original conversation about doing some kind of spring event in tandem with the climate folks.
Oh, was it?
And then realizing that they were looking at doing something for Earth Day and we were looking at doing something for Arbor Day.
Oh.
So maybe we should combine efforts.
I think we've done things for Earth Day, have we, as a tree board or anything other than, in addition to the
Yeah.
Arbor Day activity?
They've been pretty close together, so.
Yeah.
Arbor Day is April 25th.
Well, maybe we
So there's a
could be,
different state and federal Arbor Day.
Oh, really?
Yes, and it comes up every year.
National Arbor Day is.
Of course, we missed our choice chance a couple months ago. We could have planted one of those trees as an Arbor Day.
we could have held off on those trees.
Yeah, and then one as a
we held off on them for too long as it was.
So maybe that's an item for our agenda next time is to nail down the Arbor Day activity. And
Yeah,
a clear picture of the tree walk is gonna work and how, what it would take to do that, and if there's any other.
the one up on Horizon View is nice because there's plenty of room for parking and it's half the walk is in the park. It's
Are those tree walks on the website?
yes,
Okay.
Relevant information, at our council meeting 2 weeks ago, we looked at the 6-year capital improvement plan. And there's a line item for improving 5 Acre Woods. It's currently slated for 2028. Mainly because right now the lakefront park is the top park priority. So I don't, assuming that's the same thing, that in the capital improvement plan is what's referred to here. There's not an enormous amount of time sensitivity there.
I bet they're different. I think this is maybe a subset of that. I haven't seen the plan for 5 Acre Woods, the official plan. But a lot of work is going on that every month. It's gonna be, it already is a workable, usable park, and it'd be more so, as the months go on. It's got trails, it's got, I imagine things would be in the plan would be like parking, a decision about where to locate any parking. And maybe certainly other things. There's gonna be an educational center of some sort, that kind of thing. So,
In my impression, and Mark, you can correct me on this, was that the way that plan was developed was under some constraints that they felt they had to include development in some part of it. And it's sort of like, I think somebody had told me that when they put the EIS together for adding new units, putting a whole bunch of units of apartments in the parking lot, they had to include these humongous numbers like 1,500 units that nobody thought were serious, but they were required by law to put them in. And I guess I'm probably wrong about that, but it's the same thing true about this development plan for the park, that they had some reason they had to put these things in that nobody really wants.
it's hard to know.
Do you mean
Go ahead.
Lakefront Park?
No, I'm talking about 5 acres, 5 acre.
Oh,
park.
that I don't know. Yeah, that's before my time.
My memory is, because I worked with some people on putting the document together. My memory was it was thoughtfully done, but it was all preliminary, it wasn't, this is the plan that we're going to execute on. It was, when we think about the things we'd like to have, like you want to have parking, you want to have some accessibility. And that was one of the flat areas. So like Dick said, there's other options now potentially in the future. But I agree with what was said, that I wouldn't take it as written in stone.
but I'm not sure I feel that there's a need to hold back on the focus on that section of the park, right?
No, as long as
In lieu of any of that.
if the stewardship foundation is involved, city's involved, and the tree board's involved, it seems like
Yeah,
you've got the right people.
You got a plan.
My guess is the
And the
biggest
community.
stumbling block would be funding.
Yeah.
If it's not in the city's priorities for funding until 2028, and it's going to cost to have somebody come in and contractors remove things, that may not be feasible this year, is the vibe I'm getting from the conversation. But that doesn't mean that we can't. I would reword this to be like deep in partnership with groups working on 5 Acre Woods improvements. Because it sounds to me like there's already a lot of work happening there. There's other groups that are more deeply engaged in that work. And instead of setting our own priority for what we want to see, I would write it as we should more deeply engage with the groups who are already doing that work and identify places that they feel we can support their work best.
That makes sense.
That brings up one of the comments that I wanted to make about the work plan in general, but I'm reading through this. Most of these items are action points. I mean, we're going to do an Arbor Day activity, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. But I cut 3 of them that really don't say that. The first one is the fourth one on the first page says, stay in communication with peer advocacy and stakeholder groups, in parentheses, blah, blah, blah. And look for opportunities to work together. So there's no action item there. Although the 5 Acre Woods project would fit there because we want to do it with the Parks Board and we want to do it with the city and we want to do it with the, the foundation. And then the other two are on the next page, the two first ones, one that says general invasive plant management, including education options. That, there's no task there.
There's no there.
Yeah, and the one right after it says support and promote tree planting and maintenance watering events. But there's no, work item there
Yeah.
either. I don't mean we should delete them, but I think either we should think about, is there another way to word this, or is there an action item that we want to have under those headings? I suspect some of these are sort of carryover. I think in the past, we haven't always had. I think the same problems existed in some past work plans.
Well, like part of the point we're making is that the Arbor Day activity, tree planting, is actually covered in two of these things.
Yeah.
Support and promote tree planting, or it covers tree planting, and promote an annual Arbor Day activity has been tree planting.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing we have it. It's not necessarily a bad thing we have it both places. Not also.
Yeah.
Maybe the best, most logical way.
And the 5 Acre Wood project would be done in collaboration with other stakeholder groups, which is part of the public outreach.
It's almost like we need a preamble to our actions, which is, hey, we're gonna be working with peer groups. We're gonna be working on education. I mean, that's one of the objectives or the goals. But yeah, I see what you're saying.
It's straightforward to say pursue invasive tree removal in collaboration with other interested groups. Which is surely what we're gonna do. We're not gonna, the 8 of us are not gonna, 5 of us are not gonna get out there and dig up all those trees.
No.
So, collaboration with,
And it might be good when it goes to the city council to see that this is something we already have been in communication with the Parks Board and the Stewardship Foundation. Rather than just it being something coming from the tree board alone. Especially since it's going to have to require the city to get on board.
if we highlight it, then Mark will be talking about it. And that's, plenty of chance to bring that up.
Well, we could add, pursue invasive tree removal and restoration southeast corner of 5 Acre Woods in collaboration with Parks Board and Stewardship Foundation.
Okay, or just other interested groups.
Yeah.
Maybe specifics are probably good. Those are the ones that probably would.
Yeah, those are, another city board and the primary citizens organization in town. I think those are good ones.
The primary dirty hands organization too.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna capture some of these thoughts.
Did you get that, Elizabeth? The wording I just suggested for that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's hosting the annual Arbor Day. I can.
That was part of pursuing invasive tree removal. The word he just gave, it's part of pursuing invasive tree removal.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're specifically adding reference to working with Stewardship Foundation and Parks Board. And there was also a mention of having like an others. Just to,
Yeah, I think I like the idea of naming, calling them out. Doesn't mean you can't collaborate with somebody else too. For us, but those are the ones that are already involved. I think will make the most sense.
On that, stay in communication with peer advocacy. Could we scratch? What did the urban and community forestry division? Sure. The other kind of local and speak to me, the ones I want to be sure to be in contact with.
That is it.
So we did apply for the Evergreen Cities, recognition program through them this year. And that does require, I think, like 2 touch points with them to like meet, do something. So we will be probably talking with them. We're still waiting to hear back about the program.
Okay.
So yeah, and I wish they would do more, I'd say. But like working in Department of Forestry, there's a lot of like outreach to individual cities and liaisoning, in that way. And like I just haven't seen that group of the DNR kind of show up in the same way here. But maybe it's a new year, 2025, new recognition program. So give it one more year. If they're still kind of silent, figure it out would be my advice.
It's 8 o'clock and we're only on the first agenda item, so let's try to accelerate this and move on to some of the other items, which many of it could be pretty short, but. Other wording things.
Well, the fourth up from the bottom of the list. Compiled by Hannah from Monthly Reports. But this is deliver an annual report to the council, and it's including tree analysis, tree permit data.
Yeah.
So we can leave it right at that, don't we think? Well, we don't need to.
Well,
talk
but
about
why don't we,
who it's compiled from.
why don't we get rid of the analysis of pre-permitted data? We don't have it. I don't think we have it in a form that can be reasonably accessed.
It would be nice to get back to doing that though.
It'd be nice to, but I think if you're trying to do it now, you'd have to,
This is our 2025 work plan.
Yeah, we could.
So I think as an aspirational thing to
Let's
get
leave it in.
back to having those compiled in an accessible way would be good.
I agree, that seems pretty important.
We're
Is that-
looking-
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I don't know how you guys were tracking that kind of stuff before, but we are looking at a few updates to Accelerate permit tracking software right now. And I don't see why, like, adding a few little, like, questions on there, or making sure we fill them would give us that data that we could just pull in reports. Like, if we have data points in mind that we're trying to collect.
In the past, we used to get a single page, little bit of an Excel spreadsheet that have the street address, whether it was a major or minor permit, how many trees were in the permit to be removed, and something about what species the trees were and size. And it was just a few data points that,
It's interesting, but it was always hard for me to make sense of that, what it meant. Is this good news or bad news?
that was, that, it didn't have to be good or bad, it just was keeping the tree board informed of
News.
what tree removals are going on in the city. Because
Unfortunately,
that's
it tended to
something
be
we
sort
should
of-
know.
tended to be when sort of halfway through. It was halfway through the permit cycle, so half of them tended to be, not known yet, and things like that.
Monthly, so it's,
Yeah.
it's whatever was new in the permit cycle, but I, on many occasions, would look up the street address and take a look at a Google Maps to it, and then on a 2 or 3 occasions, I would drive to the site and take a look.
So specific to
Okay.
having it in our work plan though, and having this captured somewhere for what we want to do, it sounds to me like this is not, like tracking that and getting those reports is not something the tree board can do or has power over, other than saying, Drew, please do that. Is
That's right.
that correct?
That's right, but I think that's part of our role with respect to the city, is to get the city to do things that we think need to be done.
I would say, I mean,
And this is one.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go, sorry. I would say, to Mark's point, maybe what we should be doing is coming up with what is the question that we want answered by the data, and then work with the staff to try and get that. Rather than just getting something that
Yeah.
this data doesn't make sense to us.
Yeah, it'd be nice if there was some way to simply, inexpensively do some comparative data. What did this look like, how cumulative, and maybe comparing at points in the past.
We did
So,
at one point hire a college student to go in and review
I know.
a whole series of years, a
Yeah,
block of years, and summarize what the tree removal permits said had been done, which is sort of a nice summary.
Oh, they went through the paper.
Yeah, they went through all the past records like for 5 years to get a summary of how
Wow.
many trees were removed and what size and so on.
so is our action item here for this year for us as a group that we want to partner with city staff to resume compiling and reviewing tree removal data for the city? Is that an accurate
Huh.
summary of what you're
Maybe just
asking for?
Analysis of tree permit plan, and if. Not say that it's something we have to, we could say that, of course, by the urban forest planner. but-
Yeah,
But that's kind of specific for what,
analysis might not even need to be in there, just a summary of
Compilation and
Tree
review
re-
is
yeah.
what I'm,
tree removal permits.
feels like the first
Yeah.
step, since we don't even have it yet, so.
I think that's one of the things that got lost in our 4 arborists and 7 assistant planners.
Yeah, and I will like totally pull data for you guys if we could do it in a reporting way through our permit thing. But I don't think I really have the capacity to like build an Excel spreadsheet to list, them all
Yeah.
in there and then like print that every time. So if there's a good way we can just make it
Grab
like,
the monthly
reportable
report.
monthly thing, like I'm totally willing to do that, because it'd just be stuff I'm entering in Excel for the permit already,
Mhm.
so we could just say number of landmark, number of this, or and species it could have or something, and then if there's anything in there you guys want to look at closer, like I could connect you to that first number or something. If that is like satisfactory, but probably not gonna build a whole spreadsheet
No,
of
that
like
makes
monthly
sense.
everything, unless there was a specific, again. Reason we needed that data
Right.
to move something forward.
right, good.
So. We're not actually gonna do this in 2025. we're not gonna present an analysis of tree permit data. in
Not an
2025.
analysis, but we want a report.
If we
Of,
rework
this
that
year's- for
to
this year's?
partner with the city
Oh,
to
no, I
compile
guess-
and review.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And I think it's a great idea to do it,
Yeah.
but I don't, it may not work in this year's work plan,
Right.
because this is something we're gonna be doing probably in March.
So who's got a good, what does that item say now? Anybody?
Victoria, you had a good summary.
We can capture it.
It's just. Says here,
Deliver annual.
so, and I don't know how to deal with the point I raised, the fact that we really can't do it in 2025, so maybe it doesn't belong in our 2025 work plan.
But if it's an,
So-
sorry, go ahead.
I would just, so the point that's there right now, I would remove everything after the semicolon. Our actual action item there is deliver annual report to council.
That's right. I agree with that.
Delete everything else. If we want to have a separate action item
Yeah.
somewhere, probably in this section, that is partnering with the city to resume compiling and reviewing permit data, that feels like a moderately unrelated, at least at this point, separate action item for us for the year.
I like that recommendation, and
Yeah,
and I think it should be on in our plan, and I'll put my name by that from the tree board standpoint, because I think that's important. If we don't know, we don't have data or not looking at data about permits, seems like a pretty basic kind of thing to be looking at.
So you just suggest we add another item.
I like Victoria's suggestion of keep the one that's there as just about deliver annual report to council. And then create a new one, which is
We could combine those two, annual work plan and annual report.
But they're two distinct. One is looking back, the other is looking forward. So I think,
We can still make them into one thing, divide it.
We presented
It's
at
the
the
same
same time
meeting.
with the same
Yeah.
people, so.
so what I just jotted down as a new item was compile and report monthly summary of the tree removal permits. Monthly, maybe we could just delete, but monthly is how we used to get it.
Is it that, or is it actually developing a method for doing that?
Well, that would be up to Drew. I mean, our goal as the tree board is to have this report
That's why
made available.
my wording was partner with the city to compile and review, that like the majority of the compile part is Drew doing whatever Drew needs to do.
I'm just looking at
And
the
then
program right now to see. kind of
our
what-
part is partnering to figure out, is it the information we need, and then reviewing it together as a group. Is our part of that action.
Yeah, something like that.
yeah, I like that.
Good, capture that.
So can we combine the other two then?
It's gonna be crazy.
Deliver annual report and
And
plans the
plan.
council, I mean,
I don't see why not.
Sure.
they're both 1 hour or half hour things,
If that.
right? If that, right? And then so essentially what we'll be doing is replacing one of them with whatever word you guys came up with.
Well, and this, we were thinking of adding a new one. It didn't necessarily have to replace either of those.
Take one out and put a new one in.
Drew, just where we landed with all of that work for you in terms of
Yeah, we can
what
certainly
we are putting in as what we're telling council we're gonna do.
That's fine, we can definitely
Okay.
get data, I just will have to talk about what kind of data,
Yes.
is really the thing. And I'm down to get anything that's easy for me to do, that doesn't add a ton, to the
Yeah.
permit process that can be pulled in a report,
Awesome.
Okay, so we.
So, I just don't know what that quite looks like yet, but we are re-engaging with Acela to like look at some other update stuff, so it's a good time to.
Great.
To be able to nosy about it, so that's fine.
Any other changes to make to the work plan?
Just wanted to make sure, did you capture my name by that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Wow, you're good.
She's also got it recorded.
So Elizabeth will put all these changes together and send it out to all of us, basically.
Great.
I did want to say two things. One is that we have an invitation to, they don't affect the work plan really, they're in the work plan, they're detailed. And we have an invitation to present, tree information to the Windermere staff. And I'd like to do that right here, that's through. You may already have, I think it needs a summary of the tree code. A nice summary of the tree code, which I'm willing to work on, or you may already have.
Yeah.
And then just to talk about that for 20 minutes.
I would totally do that.
I'll follow up with you then to just see how we make that happen.
Acquisition.
And then,
The
Mark Phillips, we need to talk dates. The council date we're anticipating is February 27th, Thursday night, and I know you and I sit in the back there almost every meeting, so would that work for you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, we'll need
Yeah,
everything by the
great.
13th. The city clerk will be looking at me on February 13th for the materials.
Should be able to have this, we should be able to have the updated work plan. By then, I should be able to have the annual report by then, so.
You want to do it in a full council meeting or having like a work session or something like that?
I think they all, well, if I remember, I was brand new last year. I think I was in the council chambers. So I think it is the regular meeting of the 27th.
Okay,
Either way, if it's the workshop and the regular meeting, the deadlines are the same. So all staff materials are due that Friday, the 13th, and then reviewed that following week, and then the packet goes out, I'm guessing the 20th.
okay, but by the 13th, and I'm seeing all that is the revised, updated 2 pages of our work plan. That would be in the council packet.
Essentially.
We've talked about pending other things as part of that same presentation, so maybe when we get to the other items in the agenda, we can talk about those.
Okay, if there's other items we're talking about. I mentioned a minute ago that the Windermere opportunity will follow up with Drew. The other one is good video guy took a look at the video that we shot of the IV out process. He says it needs to be clear pictures, and the sound is terrible because there's cars going by all the time and everything.
Other than that, though, it's.
Other than that, it's
Other than the video and the audio, it's excellent.
so this is many of you know Gary Hockey, who's done a lot of videos in different community groups lately, and he's willing to help shoot it and help edit it, and he does very nice work. And so I talked to Stacy about this because she had expressed willingness to do a makeover if we needed to. So she and I are going to proceed, probably aim for like April to do that.
Excellent.
And if anybody else would like to be involved, please let me know. It's
So this would be just a filming session, not a significant project.
No, it won't be. It'd just be, we'll have a little tighter script, I think, than what we had before, and then it'd just be shooting it, the goal of getting a 6 or 7 minute video. So anyway, that's FYI, I'm going ahead with that, which is outreach on our work plan.
One item that may better incorporate your like presenting at Windermere and anything else that comes up in with the staff table at LFP Green Fair, do we want to reword that to be a little more broad and have it be like participate in community outreach opportunities and events, including Green Fair? That then it would also encompass things like presenting at Windermere or the climate hub launch event that we tabled at this year, or other things like that that come up.
That's fine. That's fine.
We want to put in just other community events, staff tables, other community
In
events,
fact,
because we did 4 of them this year.
Yeah.
We did, excuse me, Mark. We did 4 of them this year. We did the Green Fair, the Secret Garden Tour, the picnic in the park, and the Community Climate Action Fair. So we do actually a fair number of these things. And I think it makes reasonable sense to
So participate in community
well,
outreach events and opportunities.
yes, I think that's good. I'd rather do that than try to specify.
Name all of them in this.
Yeah, and they may not work out or whatever.
Okay.
So Green Fair and other opportunities there. Good. That's all I had. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. Random question. What is this section for?
It's like
There are 3, those blank lines that they're just blank. Like they could be Xed out, I suppose, but the 3 enumerated things are the responsibilities of the people it has in the city's mandate.
Yeah.
So that's.
No, I didn't know if it was like a status.
Yeah, no, I
put in here. Or something.
Yeah, that vertical line could just be removed, that separates.
White space is a key design element to any good document.
Like digitally left blank.
All right, good work.
So at this point, are you ready to vote on the work plan as you've amended tonight?
Good idea.
I think we can, and with the understanding that Elizabeth and Doug can work on final wording if there's any, just minor.
Ambiguity on
Details.
anything. and- Yeah.
We can work on it, and then we'll send it out to everybody else to make sure that we didn't miss anything.
But
Agreed.
Larry's point is good that we need to approve it before it gets presented to the council.
It's only 2 weeks till our next meeting too, presumably. So we can also do it then, but I'm fine with approving it now.
I'm fine for,
Or not changing it.
I move we approve it.
I second.
All in favor?
I,
Thank you, Larry. For reminding us.
Okay. 2024 annual reporting to city council. That's basically one of the jobs of the retiring chair. And I have started on it, and I passed out a list here of things that I found in the minutes that we did this year. What I would like from you is to take a look at that. Look at it, see if there's anything that I missed. I kind of like to know the date of the Community Climate Action Fair. I found a reference to it in our thing, but. And I didn't really know what to say about the handouts, Victoria, because I'm not sure what you've done. You've done some wonderful job on creating great new handouts. But I need a way to describe it a little better. I looked at last year's report, and each of these will become a paragraph. None of them, and they will explain what we actually did. But that's when I'm a little bit unsure exactly what we did. So if you could send me a,
Yeah, I'm trying to find the date of the.
It was like a summary of the
I know.
tree board functions, and there was one that was what you need to know about trees.
Yeah, so I would say updated educational materials, including urban forest brochure and recruitment flyers. That's the main things that I updated. The other ones were like event specific handouts.
so let me get that down. 'Cause I'm working with this.
Updated educational materials, including urban forest brochure and recruitment flyer.
We made a poster,
We did.
we made a poster of the benefits of large trees. Did that,
Doug,
We
the
also have the Ivy Abbott handout that we.
the tree planting at the reservoir was November 30th, if you wanted to date with that.
And so what was it?
November 30,
Was the,
the tree planting we did up at the reservoir.
oh, yeah, I have that actually, I just forgot it. That's in my calendar.
All right.
I couldn't figure out the location of the ivy removal, and I found it in Google Maps, and I could drive there if I needed to. But I couldn't find the name of the place. Mark, you remember the name of the place?
yeah, it's at 190th, roughly 190th and 35th Avenue Northeast.
But is there a name of that?
Yeah, there is. I always like to keep it out of the public.
All right, tell me what.
Private property.
Okay,
It's yeah, so it's on 35th.
okay, I won't put a place in.
north of,
Ivy removal workshop and for hands-on workshop and recruitment material. Frankly, I think that understates what you did in terms of updating material, because all those little trees and stuff like that were cool, but
Oh, that was just our projects.
okay. Well,
I'm trying to find the date from the
oh,
climate
thank
action
you, yes,
fair.
please.
Um,
Yeah, I think you two went.
find
to
it somewhere. Yeah, I know we were there. I just can't find it in my calendar.
Okay, well, we want to do the climate action fair. What was that?
What did we do? Did we have a good time? I saw you there.
October 26th, Saturday, October
Yes.
26th.
Thank you. I did not put it in my calendar.
Fortunately,
Surprising.
the Lake Forest Park
Impressed that I showed
city
up.
website has it.
You're saving energy.
Yeah, so the other thing is, Chris, is there any things that somebody remembers doing that I didn't get in here? For any reason, or?
You got that large trees chart in there.
What, Mark?
We, some of us, including you, worked on a chart of the benefits of large trees that we used at the green
It's
fair.
part of the educational materials
Okay,
that
it's
were
part of the
updated.
education material.
But yeah, I should remember doing it. I even found it when I was trying to find something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, that'll give me a nice paragraph on updated handouts. Benefits of large trees, or whatever we called it.
And right at the end of the year for 2024 Q4, Stacy and I started work with the CPAT on the climate element. If you want to reference tree board's participation in
Oh.
the CPAT.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I have something on that.
Yeah.
Advise the mayor, city council, public operation, education, I think.
So 2 members joined. I can never remember what CPAT Climate Policy Advisory Team.
Community.
Climate
Climate.
Policy Advisory Team to inform the city's climate element that will be added to the comprehensive plan.
Hopefully I've got some of that wording in the minutes for you, we'll be talking about it. Okay, election of chair, invite,
Well, wait a minute, guys, before we move on. What is the timing of this?
I'm gonna try to write this up in the next 2 weeks. So we can, the next 4 weeks, so you can deliver it to the council on the 27th,
And covers calendar year 2024,
right?
correct?
So it's the same session at which we present our work plan.
Yes,
Now we understand, Mark Hoffman, is that the way we are?
we need it by the 13th, correct?
We can approve this at our next,
Do we need to approve, I don't think we ever approved yours.
Yeah, that's ideal. You have a little bit more leeway as to the presentation you give and some slides, but all material that you want considered and reviewed should be in the packet.
If it comes from me, it's gonna be there by the 11th, or it won't be there at all.
Okay.
Did we ever approve it last year, or just?
well, I thought we did, but I don't remember.
I mean, I
We're
can,
good. Want to write it up?
Yeah.
well, I can, it will soon presumably be, I'll have it written before the next meeting, if we can bring it up at the next meeting if we want to, just take a look at it. That's no problem, okay, we'll put that in the agenda for the next meeting too.
That way,
All right.
hopefully Stacy will be there in case there's anything that
Mm.
she remembers we did that we've all forgotten.
Is there anybody else? See, well, yeah, see.
No, that's good. I just want to be sure that the date and it happens at the same time as the new plan gets presented.
All right. Selection of chair and vice chair for 2025, I guess we need to do that next month.
Yes, it has to be done by the end of February according to our documents.
So. I am certainly hoping and kind of assuming that Mark is going to be willing to run for chair, unopposed.
We had talked about that and I agreed to it. It would be pretty scurrilous of me to back out. at this point.
So the bigger question is who will be willing to be vice chair?
Vice chair.
Or run against him, right?
No, we can't afford to waste candidates like that. Logically, it's either you or Stacy.
It'd be great if one of you would decide to do it. Yeah.
I will, between now and our meeting in 2 weeks, whenever it is, I will look at what other things I've committed to already for the next 12 months.
Being vice chair doesn't commit you to very much.
No, it doesn't.
But it
Well, what
does,
I've committed to in the next 24 months,
There you
but
Right.
I'll nominate Stacy.
I think either of you would do fine.
Yes,
I'm joking. That was a joke because she's not here.
No, I think.
make sure it's in the
maybe you
minutes for
should get-
next meeting.
So maybe you should get in touch with Stacy and you just sort of negotiate, which if you could draw a straw or something like that, so you get some sort of straw. I have to say, it was much more, being chair has been much more fun than I thought it would be. I really,
It really doesn't get you.
yeah, I had to be dragged into a kicking and screaming, but I've enjoyed it.
And I think everybody, it's one of those things everybody should plan to do while they're on board.
Yeah. So in other words, if you don't do it next year, you need to do it the year after.
Is there gonna be training? Is there gonna be a common conference I can go attend? You want to do this or?
You've already been in city council, that should be helpful.
You have to become a council member, you have to be in the planning commission. Yeah, you're good.
And, yeah, I guess the main thing is getting together with, Drew and Elizabeth to be sure the agenda's ready.
Yeah.
And then run the meeting.
Although,
Okay.
more stuff comes up, but that's basically the main thing, yeah. I guess a lot of the stuff I did as chair was mostly because my particular interest and expertise in trees, not because I was the chair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some of the things that we've covered in the last year, you were perfect for.
But they weren't really things I did because I was chair. Any more than things that Mark did were because he was vice chair. Okay, so we have the exceptional tree list on here. Drew, you have some things you want to say about this, so let me
Yeah,
Back up this-
also, okay, go
Let
first.
me back up one step here. Drew and I talked about this yesterday, I think. There's a bunch of little things we need to bring to the council. There's the tree list, which I really should be just a routine action item. Nobody in the tree list is good. Council is gonna care whether Katsura something or other, or is 15 feet or 20 feet, or whether we included or didn't include Western barberry, which that was not a good thing. Anyway, so it really should be a routine action item, but we were thinking, she and Mark, I think, were thinking that we could package that in along with the report. And Drew would be there to justify the changes we made. There are other things, there's half a dozen little, what we consider housekeeping changes in the municipal code. One of them is that wherever it refers to, several places where it refers to the tree list, it says the tree list as of August 31st, 2024 or 2020, something like that. Some very specific date referring to this, which is a nuisance because they don't, gives us no flexibility to change it. And in fact, all these changes we've made here would be inapplicable. So I think with those dates need to be changed to general tree list as of so forth, or as amended later, whatever. That's kind of up to you, Mark, to figure out what's good wording for that to make it so we don't have to go through this every time. There is something odd in we talked last month about the canopy study, and Drew told us that may sort of be done, may sort of do itself to some extent. We don't necessarily have to contract it for it this year, but we want to keep something about it in the code. But there's also a second line in there after it says we need to do a canopy study every 5 years, saying that, and it should be accompanied by a calculation based on if all the trees that were planted have grown up since then. All the trees were planted since the last study were done, have grown up, what would the canopy cover be, which is an utterly useless number. Because it doesn't come, as soon as no other trees have been cut, and then no other trees, none of our 290,000 trees in the city have grown. So we both really want to kind of get rid of that. What?
Is that really in the code?
It really is in the code. It is total nonsense.
What were they trying to accomplish?
Well, I think let's follow on that. When you get a tree removal permit, you have to commit to planting trees that will achieve a certain canopy to replace what was removed. And I think they were probably trying to write something in the code that would assure that was followed up.
Yes, but it's a
That's not very
useless number, it's
meaningful.
a huge amount of work to do. So I think we could work in the exact way you change the wording, but basically we want to get rid of that. And were there other items that I think we need to say something, Larry, you've been concerned about this. Just add a word or two to the definition of a grove, specifying that can be overlapped two properties.
Yeah, that's on the list.
Yeah.
And then just some other little like planning review basically stuff. Which like I'm building a matrix right now of like the old, the new, and why we're changing it, and then also a tracked copy. So you guys will have them in 2 different spots for that. It's a lot of little stuff. But the thing is like, yeah, so you gotta go to council for work plan. And then exceptional tree stuff, and then there's these other miscellaneous code items and the tree list. So yeah, I guess seeing like, can we just sneak in at least just the tree list with the work plan, and then do the code update stuff with the exceptional tree stuff, so we're just like, hey, we're doing all the code stuff, because the code changes are gonna need, the exceptional tree one for sure is gonna need SEPA, and so that's like a whole process we have to do. So I'm not sure at what level, like something's big enough where it needs it, versus like a housekeeping code, so to me, it's just kind of like, we're changing the code, we should maybe do, if it's gonna need SEPA, all of that under one, to reduce, staff. But for the tree list, in Mark's opinion, if we can sneak that in with the work plan, or if that should just wait, just to get our new tree list adopted, since it was part of the work plan for 2024.
And we finished the 6
And
months.
we finished it, yeah.
It's kind of making.
Oh, yeah.
There is one more related item I'd like the tree board to consider. So with the replanting guide, so for the right of way replanting. Tier 1 is in the right of way corridor. And tier 2 are the priority areas that are citywide that you've identified. And then the bottom tier would be an in lieu of payment. My question for the tree board for you to discuss at some point, should there be something in between 2 and 3, which is elsewhere in the city as space permits?
Well, I would have said it was.
I thought there was something like that, but
It was in one version, but it got taken out before. Because basically what this means is if there's not enough space in the right of way corridor and there's not enough interest in the priority areas, then it automatically goes to in lieu of.
yeah.
if we're paying people to plant trees, which,
Yeah, we
We'd
want the
rather have to
trees
plant
more
trees.
than the money.
okay, so yeah, definitely.
And we're already changing that section slightly, because right now the code limits the replantings to the 15 to
Oh, right,
you
yeah.
know, 20 feet, the smallest trees, but if you're not planting in a right of way area. Then you don't need to be limited to that size, and so it just kind of doesn't make the sense to have it in there, like, we're not gonna approve anything that's oversized for an area anyway.
Right.
So we are already planning to touch that little
So we're
part of
just
the
gonna
code, so it would not be much to reevaluate that.
So we'll just say. Things in the general tree list.
Yeah, we can, I can plan on bringing those code changes to the next meeting.
Okay, yeah, and it's giving that ahead of time. So we can
Yeah.
look at it. Okay, so that's,
I'm sorry, just a couple of questions on that. So the tree board approves those changes, the to the ordinance?
Yeah, so a lot of them are like, it's stuff coming from the tree board. Like suggestions, and then also stuff from me just at working in the planning department of things that need to be tweaked. Then we kind of go over them together, you know, you guys can give your approval on it, and then we take it to council for approval.
It's our advice, that's one of our roles is advisory to the
Yeah,
council.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say, it would be.
We don't approve it, we
it's
recommend it,
advisory.
we their approval.
Okay, okay.
but we officially advise.
We take, we take.
We
vote,
take-
yeah.
Yeah, these are our recommendations.
I will say the council tends to give a fair bit of deference to. Official recommendations coming from the tree board, planning commission, since you've deliberated about it.
Sure.
Also, I was wondering if I could ask. So at our meeting in 2 weeks, are you planning to have the cover letter for tree diameters, so that kind of like an explanatory statement?
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna go over today, which I don't know if we have enough time.
It's
now.
actually
I
the
can-
next item on the agenda, so,
Yeah,
um, get that. Yeah.
so basically, like, what I have.
It's
That other
it's this
one.
item.
If we wanna,
Sorry.
speed run it real quick, we can go through it. So I'm working on the memo 10, we're going through the chart, we need legal to look at it. So basically I summarized what's all gonna be in the memo in here, just to make sure we're all on the same page with sizes and opinions, and see if there's any other corrections you wanna make before we start. Going further with this, because I wasn't here for the meeting where the only time we've talked about it before, I did watch back and kind of listen, but just some more justification, and again, like, this is not set in stone yet. So like, you know, if there's any changes or things where you're like, that's kind of an overreach or pushing it before we start bringing it. For legal advisement and getting that memo finalized and everything, like, I'd like to get it, because the memo's mainly coming from the planning department, not so much the tree board. But it's informed by your opinions and comments on this, so it's kind of the process there. So just going over, you know, it'll be an intro of why we're protecting large trees and the increased benefits that they have compared to smaller. A lot of this stuff, you know, we've already talked about. Then kind of going on the next one, pulling the tree benefits, I think is a really good way to look at, you know, these differences. On the left, we have a 42-inch diameter big leaf maple, which is the current size. And then in a year, you know, what kind of benefits that gives you versus looking over here on the right, a brand new one, you know, if we cut that tree down and this is the 2-incher, how those benefits are different. So this is just kind of some information that helps us and for newer people in the tree board or anybody kind of show, like, aid in our big tree argument about why we're preserving trees and how good those benefits are compared to something we're new planning. Can you go to the next page? So then, and we run on a 30-year cycle, but iTree does it at 20 years, so that's why I went with 20 instead of 30. But looking how even after 20 years, that's like over those 20 years, you know, like the impacts of a 2-inch tree versus, you know, in a single year, what a 42-inch diameter tree is. So I think like using some of this in our memo, just showing, you know, the exponentially larger benefits we're getting with the big trees and how that can't really be replaced effectively even after 20 years by some smaller stuff we're planting, about why we want to retain them.
The air pollution number is nice, because it's, you know, over 20 years, it takes up about 1.25 of what the big tree would do in 1 year.
In 1 year,
The
yeah.
one for, unfortunately, for CO2 uptake is not quite as dramatic, but
I know, yeah,
Other
the air pollution ones are really good. So again, that's a great number to pull specifically for this. I wish it did 30, or I could like program different years into that. I was still kind of playing around because then we could even see our replacement.
And the CO2 update, the stuff, the actual absolute values at the bottom are pretty impressive too,
Yeah,
differences.
uh,
It's not shown on the 20-year one, because it's not the same scale.
yeah. And so like iTree is a good tool, and I think it'll be helpful as building our case again about like just reminding everyone about why we have an exceptional tree code. in that, memo and explain that. Next one. So then we'll get into the exceptional tree sizes and their threshold diameters. So it's gonna kind of look like this in the chart, which is where this is the current one. This has none because these are new additions potentially. New proposed DBH. So you see some of them are gonna be pretty similar, and then some of them have a little bit of a bigger jump. And those numbers are based off of our findings from the ecosystem assets report that we got, kind of inventorying what the average size tree and how many of them are, and also just kind of best science out there about protecting trees at certain sizes and what's worthy of additional protections. And then this is gonna be the previous percentage that we think was affected by the code, and then the newly affected one. So you'll see like the big leaf maple dropped significantly, but the amount of did I hit something? Protected didn't change that much. Doug fir is the highest kind of estimated percent, which makes sense. It's the most common tree in the area.
That seems high. I want to recheck that number, make sure I gave you I gave you the numbers.
Okay, I think it was right
It was right.
from our discussions, but I know it's been a little bit.
Yeah.
So you see some of these are at 0.
Part of that is just the sampling error.
I know it's I
Yeah,
left.
Small numbers, yeah.
I left his
That's why I
comment in
think-
here to me because I thought it was funny. He said that's sampling for you. So well, that's kind of good. Yeah, and then the new ones here. And then I kind of just gave like a power word to a lot of these, like a lot of these are considered keystone species because or especially for caterpillars and moths, and different roles that they play in the forest, just increasing biodiversity, cultural keystone. Western white pine really great at carbon sequestration. And then just the addition of everything else over 40, about how important just large trees are in general again and maintaining the diversity. So that's kind of the argument we're making here within the document for these items.
And just incidentally, the weird numbers for western white pine, there were four western white pines in the sample. 3 of which are very small and 1 of which is large, but because of the way the sample was taken, the big one counts for way more than the small ones. So
Yeah, and I was gonna pull some of the dead tree data I kind of have collected for western white pine too, of showing that we're losing a lot of our really large ones. So lowering that number to just capture some of these little ones that might have a better chance at surviving, might be a good option for there, is my thought.
that's a very small number of trees. It's
Yeah.
75% is impressive, but it's a
How
very
do you
small.
address that when you're presenting this? I mean,
That's
it's one
gonna
thing
be-
to say there was talk about the statistics behind this and the low numbers, but.
Yeah, so a lot
How
of
can
that's
you
gonna be in the
speculate?
memo, of it, of this, and that'll be like the really detailed, like, doc about those kind of things. We're not sure exactly if we're gonna present the, like, previous or new, or estimated, so yeah, that's what we kinda gotta figure out.
Yeah,
How we're presenting this in a concise.
Cause you
Council
know,
member.
there's gonna be a number affected for western hemlocks and those other ones that you have is 0.
I think that one thing to explain is anything in parentheses, there is simply too little data for those numbers to be meaningful. We're giving you what the data show, but those numbers are not meaningful. And in fact, that's probably true for the big leaf maple too, just because of the sampling, but how to.
Well, and I think what it says for a lot of these things, for fir, madrone, hemlock, short pine, oaks. If there are any large trees around here, we really want to keep.
Yeah.
There aren't any. I mean, we didn't find any in the survey. Again, it's just only 600 trees. But
Yeah.
We didn't find any in the survey, but if there are any that are of any size at all, we want to protect it.
Yeah, and so if we're not finding any at these sizes, like so we're not, protecting any of the large ones at that current size that we have. So it's another argument for kind of lowering it so that we are presenting.
It just,
Or,
in this case, there's exactly 1 true fir in the sample of 600 trees, no madrones. Maybe 6 or 8 western hemlock, but they're all really small. I mean, 30 inches is still not close to the largest one.
also we're
No
finding
short
out
pine.
here, we don't have a lot of small western white pines.
Right, yeah. No oaks in the sample at all, as far as I know. So anyway,
A 30-inch oak, I'd be surprised if there is a 30-inch oak in Lake Forest Park.
we do, but if we do happen to have one, we sure want to protect it.
Yeah,
I know we're 1, maybe 2,
Anyway,
but 30 is kind of big. It makes
It's
me like
really nice,
28,
I
yeah.
one thing we can point out about this, I think, and I'm not absolutely sure. The previous one, and I'm not sure, maybe you have this in the next slide or something. The previous numbers, I didn't know what they were based on. There were opinions or something like that, but they were not, as far as I can tell, based on the previous survey, simply because when I asked Mark's predecessor, Steve, yeah,
Mhm.
if there were any data, we had a meeting 5, 6 years ago about this whole, I spoke up at the council meeting. And I asked, are there any data? He said, no. Well, it turns out there were. He didn't know it. So I don't think anybody's at that time had ever looked at the data we had. We have new data now that are better. But these numbers that are before, I'm pretty sure are best based. Well, 42 sounds pretty good. Let's go for 42.
Yeah, I'm trying to put like that so much in it, saying like this was done for no reason, you know,
Yeah, I know.
just saying like unknown origins of how these were determined, and now we're using, you know, like self-correcting with
Yeah.
the data we're able to get. And more information we have, and so.
It's one of my, just trying to absorb this, Drew, and maybe this is on a future slide, but I'm trying to figure out what is the impact on the community? Like
Yeah,
both from a community forest standpoint and from a resident standpoint, like how many people are going to be actually, you know,
impacted.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay, yeah, so like the new affected kind of gives us an idea of how many like residents are affected, you know, as well. And then, you know, I'll keep going, and then if I don't answer a question by then, we'll come back.
One answer to the question though is, we could put a column in there, and I'm not quite sure how you do it, all trees. The previous things protected 0.75% of the trees. The new ones protect 1.9% of the trees. So if we can find it,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
yeah,
That
if we
might
can find a
be
place to
good.
put that in, that's.
I was gonna say, that seems like a
It's just a little more.
better metric to me than those two columns.
Yeah, so maybe like we keep this in the memo, but when for council presentation, we go total percentage, but
Remove
have it
those
available
two
if they're asking
columns.
about a certain
Yeah.
species protection.
And that's a percentage of trees,
Total
of
trees.
total trees, okay.
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
Yes,
From a data perspective, so could you jump back to that table?
Yeah.
For the rows where there just isn't enough, I don't know that I would just say like 75% in parentheses if there's an enormous error bar. So maybe it's just better for those to say like asterisk, sample size too small, and just be honest about that.
NA in
Yeah.
all of those, something like
yeah,
that.
this could be more internal, us looking at it, and maybe what we put in is, yeah, sample size too small.
So, I mean, if I read that kind of literally, and it says, we're looking to protect 0% of our coronas.
Yeah.
Are they not worthy of being protected?
Yeah.
And what is the
Does
point
it
of
present-
changing
Yeah.
something from 0 to 0?
And just to acknowledge, and
Yeah.
to say that, you know, we just don't have that level of precision from the data, and just be honest about it for certain species.
One place that we percentage, I probably put it, I'm quite sure I put it in when I sent it to Drew, but there shouldn't be parentheses around the 0% for everything else, because we know what that is.
Yeah.
I mean, we know it's 0. It's not, that's not just kind of about 0, it's exactly 0.
We know it's.
Of others.
Also, maybe clarification about, so there's Douglas fir and then there's fir, so just maybe saying like other fir trees.
No,
Or-
Douglas fir is not a true fir. It's not a fir.
Okay.
The common name
It's an
Yeah,
imposter.
and, you know, I sort of like to spell Douglas fir all as one word. Or at least put fir in lowercase, not,
Yeah, I
Okay,
pulled this
so
from
far.
just how it was in the code, so
Oh,
there's
okay.
some formatting, you know, that could be,
Maybe, or just in row 3 to call it like true firs.
yeah.
Yeah.
Just so that there's no confusion about whether a Douglas fir.
Yeah.
You know, it looks like it's row 2, but maybe it also row 3
Right,
applies.
right.
Yeah.
Something so it's easier for the public.
And another one there actually is red cedar is one word.
Mm-hmm,
Red cedar is not a cedar. Western red cedar is not a cedar.
yeah, again, a little bit of formatting stuff we still need to get done. But yeah, the point about the two is, it's good, okay, yeah, that's why we have the Latin names for everything too, just to kind of. And wanted to clarify that in here that specifically invasive trees, and we have invasive trees defined in the code. So I slightly am updating that definition to just pair with this so that, you know, it's very clear which trees we're talking about there.
If I could ask one more question.
Okay.
Just to kind of prepare you for when this goes to council, like if you look at the Western Hemlock Row. Changing from 36 to 30, even though there isn't really a known how that will affect. And so just asking like, where did 30 come from? Just being prepared to answer that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we did it on like. Yeah, estimated average gross size at,
To be really honest, some of those are just sort of, this seems like a nice number, like for the fir.
And I can also kind of envision legal.
Yeah.
They're gonna wanna know like, where did 30 come from, and saying it's a nice round number.
It's not gonna fly. That's a good reminder, council member. We did share Kim Pratt's prior email. This won't make it through review to council without a justification.
For each one, maybe we'll just go through, this is this, add a new column here, justification.
Yeah,
Right.
you need to show the math, and you guys are experts, so I'm not worried about it, but it won't make it to a recommendation and being considered unless there's a legal basis, or we cannot apply it as
Yeah.
a development regulation.
Show your work.
Well, how far do you go on that? I mean, you could, like the tree information you were sharing a minute ago, Drew, you could probably parse out what 8 inches in diameter means in terms of, you know, carbon and stormwater, but you want it, is it enough to just say increase stormwater retention, increase carbon sequestration, or?
Yeah,
It's really hard.
Each number has to have a basis. If they're looking at me and saying, why is that number chosen? And any of the answers are, it sounds good, or I think it should be that, then that's not going to go in the code.
we can do like a percentage of estimated maximum size the tree would get to in this environment.
Yeah.
Would-
And so what
You know.
we're heading to is a reminder of sharing Kim Pratt's email again. Now, I don't want to be the expert. I don't want to judge the rationale. There just has to be a scientific basis for choosing the number. Otherwise, it won't be a development of code. It would be similar to what was just said about my predecessor saying there is no basis. They're just a number. And we don't want to go to that world. That's not why they were chosen originally. And that's not what the amendment will be based on this time around.
I think going with some iTree data about carbon sequestration and so on is probably the best justification.
A lot of work.
You know, in response, you know, pointing out that there was no justification for those original ones as far as any record persisting in the.
Well, there
Yeah.
was, we just don't know what it was, and time changes, so we can't go back in time and find it. There was a basis, and if there wasn't, we don't want to repeat it. So my guess is there was a basis. Those staff members or board members have moved on, and so it's just not known. And so we wouldn't repeat an issue here. The obligation is to ground it in science somehow. And so
So
we'll
my mark
leave
is
that
that
up to you.
without a record of that justification, we are going by what we feel based on the new data from iTree and other scientific evidence that best represents the protections that we think the city should provide.
That's a basis, yes.
Larry?
Yeah, I don't want to put my hands too far on the scale on this, but I might just suggest if there's a particular species that you're struggling to come up with that justification, it is always an option to delete that row from the table and then let it just be in the everything else. So like,
Yeah.
like if, for
Yeah.
instance, if Western white pine, they're saying 75%, that feels like a weird number. If you're really struggling to come up with a scientific reason, then you might just say, let's, you know, maybe it belongs in the catch-all category.
Although the catch-all is really big,
yeah. I
and
mean,
so,
these are all native. Oh, that's a good justification. You know, like they offer, again, we'll talk about, you know, biodiversity and use of for wildlife and native.
I
Insect
think-
populations, like, you know, there, so that's why they're separated out from everything else to begin with. But I think if we just kind of maybe look at, okay, we expect the average lifespan of these to be 250 years old. What is, you know, like say 75% of the size of one that big, and maybe set them, you know, say we're using that, which might make some adjustments to this, or just have some type of way we're working backwards to determine that number, I think is what you're saying, right?
Well, yeah, and I agree that there's really no way we're gonna justify 30 inches for fir. There's no trees anywhere near that size. Well, there's only one tree, it's not 30 inches. So I don't,
But not justifying based on the inventory, justifying based on iTree data or based on average growth over a period of time.
Yeah,
So it
we're-
doesn't matter
That's-
what the
that's what
ones
they
in the
are.
inventory.
So we're reading the
are.
definition of an exceptional tree, which is like a significant like size and quality, or, you know, whatever it says in there. And then saying, how are we determining what's an exceptional tree? You know, like, is it, 80% of the estimated total diameter could get, over time, or, like something kind of coming up with a rough way and then applying that here. And then factoring in some of the other things about it on top of that, like it could be multiple.
Also, I just kind of big picture, this might be a question for Mark Phillips. Is there a reason why those 7 species were in the previous version of the tree code? So not why the numbers, but why those 7 species?
I think the focus was on the most familiar native species.
Cause it was grand fir, not just fir in general in that original list.
Yeah,
And,
I think, the ones that have the most impact to the environment around here.
I mean, and just thinking that that's also something you're gonna wanna justify is why are those particular species emphasized?
well, I think at that time we were kind of cautious about this idea, and I think we're kind of cautious about limiting the number of trees that we were gonna include in this. And making sure those were native.
But I think, in terms of the truth of it, we're not changing short pine and oaks. I don't know how we're gonna, but again, if we can say how big the tree might get and then do some quantification below that, maybe so, but.
Is there something?
They are trees, I agree, that should be added. But
Yeah,
The size,
so,
but getting a reason for choosing that size is very difficult. I don't know a good reason, but I don't think we ought to say, well, whatever size the current arborist thinks is important.
what's what I'm saying, like short pine, we have at 16 because we know it doesn't get as big as these.
Right.
So if we can just work through like what we think like a very mature tree for these sizes are, and then work on a percentage off of that, and then just apply that across the board, like that would be a way we got there that has a scientific backing.
It would, of course, we look at they're all tiny fractions of the size of the largest trees in the Olympics. So I'm not sure how we can say, well, we think it should be 38% of the size of the gigantic Doug fir and tweeds.
Yeah.
That's not gonna work very well either.
And it doesn't, I would interpret it as, it doesn't necessarily need to be the maximum size that tree could ever get, but look at the 75% of the 50-year, 80-year growth expectation for a tree that they're not gonna be old growth. And they're not gonna be 90% of old growth, but they could be 75, we wanna protect over 75% of what the estimated 50-year growth would be. Something
If we can
closer
get
to
that
that
number.
acknowledges we're not in the forest.
Yeah, think we can get that number?
I think so.
Okay, let's try
Yeah,
let's see what
so
we can do
I
with
think-
those.
Let's do that, let's look
Is
and
there-
see if we can get those.
Is there a factor that has to do with overall forest succession? And aside from those benefits that we've been reviewing, but the overall progression of the forest that is more dependent on larger trees, or in some ways more dependent on larger trees?
It's tough because we have a very urban forest.
Yeah.
That's not like continuous and spread out and everything, and so I just struggle a little bit to apply like broader scale forestry stuff like that to something like this when this is urban forestry, at the end of the day. But a lot of cities have exceptional tree code.
Yeah.
So like we also don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can also like look at some that have been recently updated, see what they were presenting on, and what their justification were, and see if we're just in line with what other departments are doing in legal.
Can you
Yeah,
remind,
but your word choice is important. You can't just refer to the Seattle tree code and it's in there, so that's our justification. But if they cite a source or report, yeah, you don't have to recreate that. You don't have to science it to death. It just has to be used and cited as a basis in case we get sued.
can you remind me on the iTree analysis, those are species specific?
Yes.
If it would be helpful in you're going through and reviewing and trying to make a case for each of these numbers, I would be happy to spend an evening playing on iTree and do some of the major markers, like you had comparisons on previous slides, and look at what is a 2-inch diameter versus a 30 versus a 42, so that you can look at like making a case for
Yeah,
What?
I told.
what threshold we're trying to get to.
It's kind of hard because with the
If that
iTree,
would
like
help.
showing the bigger one does benefits, but you do like this versus this, and you're like, let's turn to this one, which has less benefit, and so all of a sudden it feels weird.
If it would be helpful to you at all to look at the like small tree versus recommended versus existing. I am happy to go through and make a little chart of all of those. If it doesn't seem like it would be helpful, I'm happy to not.
My recollection is that not all of these species are analyzed in iTree, or, you know.
Everyone I've plugged in has been in there so far. I think some of weirder stuff might not be, and also you gotta like searching by the Latin name is particularly helpful because the common name is gonna be really different. But it sounds like the biggest kind of hurdles we still need to go over with this that I can noodle around with and talk with you on is just getting justification for these size changes that are backed by, something else other than this feels right, based on our expertise.
Right, and I think for red cedar and Doug fir at least, we're protecting 2.8%. That seems like a reasonable thing to describe as exceptional. Or reasonable, I mean,
Yeah,
reasonable is never a reasonable basis, but
Another thing from a cultural perspective is that our forest in Lake Forest Park was logged about 100 years ago. Right? Maybe it would be a good idea to be preserving trees that date to that time. And that might be a big leaf maple with 30 inches of diameter. I mean, what is the size expectation for a 100-year-old Douglas fir, 100-year-old big leaf maple, 100-year-old western hemlock? That as a community, we should be preserving the things that are remnants of the forest as it started to regrow at the same time the community started to grow it in terms of human habitation.
That strikes me as a strong cultural piece to it.
And if it's possible to get estimates for what the size of a 100-year-old of each of these is, that might be some supporting evidence that we could use.
yeah, we can also just say too, in general, like 100-year-old trees, we think have crossed that threshold into providing maximum tree benefits as a mature tree. So yeah, we're gonna use that as a point of like how big are each of those? I think that's great, and that's Bainbridge does theirs off of approximately 100 or known to be 100. Even if they're like this size or known to be 100 is their threshold for their cover.
Interesting.
Well, Drew, I think the idea of looking at you've probably already done this, but the idea of looking at other existing exceptional tree definitions from, cities that haven't been sued.
Yeah, no one has over this code yet, and so that's just the reason you don't want to be the first, or anything. But a lot of times you're not getting sued over this either. You're getting sued over being told you can't remove one of these and then working back from there as to why they're mad about it. And our code does offer a lot of options for still being able to remove it. Like some are more expensive, or need a lot of levels of approval, or you need to do these mitigation things, but we do have pathways to still being able to remove something that is protected under this code. So that automatically helps a lot. And the one that just happened up in Edmonds, they specifically had a really intense replanting procedure that had no deviation options, from it. And that's kind of what they got sued over. So again, just not saying it's this way or the highway, no other options, and not providing those was really the issue. So I will say, I think we have a strong exceptional tree code from there, offering a root process, and these other things to do that. So I know we're almost out of time. So we can still touch back on this. I mean, this is probably gonna have to be a couple more conversation. Again, I just don't want to rush this because this is the biggest thing we're gonna do for the year, and I want it to just that's all to be really on it. So I just have this of why we're adding short pine, and then I linked to these things from the National Wildlife Federation about keystone plants and their use for different species. And so short pine's one of the top species for caterpillar and moth usage as a host plant. And it's a good just native or conifer species that's not on ours. So just justification about why we're adding it to the list and giving it its own thing. Oak trees, same thing, 436 species for Gariana alone, and oaks in general are just like a better climate adaptable, drought tolerant, and just host for a lot of different species. Everything else, big tree argument, increased biodiversity. So.
Just going back to that slide you had there, one thing I can do, but from back to the previous slide.
The table,
yeah, sorry, I guess I used the previous.
Okay.
Most of those we've set somewhat arbitrarily are at 30. I can certainly look at the data and say that 12% of the trees, if I take out Doug fir and maybe take out Doug fir and red cedar, let's say, which we have pretty good numbers for, and big leaf maple, what percent of the rest of the trees in Lake Forest Park are over 30 inches?
Yeah.
If that would be a useful number, it's not would be any work at all to calculate.
It's just kind of nice, because if we had really solid numbers for all of these, I feel like then we could say, okay, we wanna protect 3%, you know, of
Right.
all of them, and then work back from there to get these, but we just don't, so then we're kind of like guessing what we think 3% is for that event, you know, essentially, like, that's kind of how
Yeah,
we end up with those
big
numbers.
leaf maple is really weird because it's just a ridiculous size distribution. It's very hard to say.
And then just last item is that, yeah, this will have to go through legal, we'll talk about it, getting the memo together. Non-project SEPA, so that's gonna require some public noticing. We might get some comments back on that, and that's just kind of when this would become more public, but that's required for the code update, and then city council, like, obviously. A couple touches deciding what we wanna pick with it. So it's just like an update plan, and I'm coming with housekeeping updates at the next meeting, and then maybe hopefully an update to some of this chart stuff for us to reevaluate and talk about. But I didn't really wanna write this whole memo when we haven't finalized, you know, this yet, so this is just a breakdown of what'll be in there, for us to work on, and then get right. Alright,
That's helpful, thanks.
cool.
Now, somebody mentioned the next council. Did I mishear?
Hmm?
There's no
No.
item on the next council for this, and so I want to check in. on your timing.
Well, no, I said we need to plan a time to take this to council, and it'll be a couple touches, but not anytime soon.
Okay.
But sorry.
I mean, just the SEPA process itself, waiting for the state to approve changes. I mean, that could take weeks, couple months.
If they don't grant expedited review, it's 60 days at Commerce. SEPA, and I don't want to prejudge a checklist or not, but a non-project SEPA is at least 6 weeks. And then trusting the comments and seeing where we're at.
And so, because it's so public facing, that's why I just wanna, yeah.
And that's once you have an ordinance,
Right.
not what you showed tonight. So tonight it was a makings. If you wanted to do a work session at council as a discussion item, that's different. That we would just need to know for our leadership team, ask deputy mayor, consider it, and then the council could pre-hear it or prepare, but until you have an ordinance, none of those official steps can occur.
But is there any way of finding out what the justification was for the numbers that are currently in the code? I mean, there's a memo this time presenting, just supporting it, there should have been one before. Because I really have no idea what, well, of course, we wouldn't find support for the short pine thing, but for things like
Yeah.
Madrone, we're gonna say,
Well, I'm a planner, and so I know what legal and my review will be, and that is what is the basis, and capture it in the recital sentences
right.
in the ordinance. What is the basis? That would be legally challenged. So if we went back to the original ordinance that amended or put this in code, my hope would be the summary of those is there, and if they cite a report or cite a reason, we can go back to that. If they don't, then the obligation is to do so in this ordinance.
okay, so we clearly have a lot more work to do on this to find. I'm happy with the number, but finding justification for them is gonna be hard. Particularly the ones that aren't in the code already.
Yeah, I
And
think
then-
the legal concern is that if we're making it a smaller tree, therefore more trees will be saved. Someone might say, why are you doing this when I could have cut it down last year? That's,
Why are you applying this number to my property rights? And if there's no justification or scientific basis, it's arbitrary and capricious. I'm not an attorney, but that's the argument.
That was why the idea that if you are really struggling, just make it a catch-all. Because I think that's more justifiable. Well, to
Sorry,
start,
is
that the idea that if you're really struggling with a particular species, then maybe the best choice is to take it out of the list.
leave it at the size that it was before, because then we're not.
Or that, yeah. To start your
That's where it
search,
comes it out.
you want ordinances 1152 and 1157, both of which are from 2017. Okay.
Okay.
Those were the ordinances, I believe, that created the exceptional tree list in the first place.
That's pretty recent. Yeah, okay.
I move we adjourn.
Yeah.
Second,
Second.
but actually, we have the agenda for next meeting, you have
Yeah, let's
all sorts of stuff on it.
Here's my list, Arbor Day plan.
proposed code changes that Drew was gonna bring in a draft of that for us to start looking at. The tree list discussion will continue, I suppose, and we'll see where we are in 2 weeks if there's gonna be.
The tree list, I think we're done with. You don't mean the exceptional
Oh,
tree?
I'm in the
list?
exceptional tree, okay,
Yeah, the meeting is only in 2 weeks too, so we'll see what,
Yeah, but you talked about a draft memo, didn't you?
Yeah.
that'll be kind of at the end of the exceptional tree stuff. We gotta get this, so I gotta look into some other justification, we'll bring that. See if we can all, once we can all agree on that. And then we'll take it to legal as like a just kind of outline thing, make sure that all sounds good, then we can fully write it. I think.
Was there a memo you were gonna draft to for the tree list itself?
Think so, we can just do a short paragraph for it, the tree list.
We don't need to do it, we're just gonna.
Yeah,
Never never really been clear to me, we need to see, have the council approve the tree list, frankly. But
that's the problem, is it doesn't say if we do or not, you know,
Yeah.
it's not clear, so it's implied like that we need to, but if we just sneak it with a work plan. I think we could just say we updated it, can you approve it? While we're here, approving the work plan.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll look at the final draft of the work plan, even though we've approved it, but we'll receive that. Was there anything else?
I think the election of the officers.
Oh, yeah, officer elections.
If
And
you wanna have 5 Acre Woods on this, I can put together just a little presentation or proposal about it or something.
approving the final draft of the annual report as well.
okay, if you want to.
It's a good idea.
Okay. Okay, sounds like you got enough of that stuff down?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, we've already had a motion to adjourn. And second, all in favor?
Aye.
Go done.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mark.
Take care.